In the world increasingly guided by instant pleasure metrics, where everything is calculated in likes, forced smiles, and generic motivational phrases, the word happiness has become almost a social imperative. There is a silent but constant pressure to always be well, always light, always grateful, even when something inside screams. But what if this search for happiness is taking us away from what really matters? Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and survivor of the horrors of concentration camps, proposed a revolutionary idea. Human beings are not in search of happiness, but of meaning. This simple statement breaks with the entire logic of life, based on pleasure as the ultimate goal. Frankl observed that, while happiness is an unstable emotion, which depends on external factors and the present moment, meaning is something that transcends the now. It is an answer to the question, why continue even when everything seems to be falling apart? Happiness, when sought directly, often slips away like sand through your fingers. Meaning, on the other hand, when found, is capable of sustaining the soul even on the darkest days. It is no wonder that he said, happiness cannot be pursued. It must come as a side effect of a purposeful life. In this context, happiness ceases to be an end in itself and becomes a natural consequence of living with purpose. Frankl saw this in an almost clinical way. Patients who sought only immediate pleasure, quick relief from suffering, ended up immersed in an existential void. Meanwhile, those who engaged in something greater, a cause, a love, an ideal, were able to endure pain with dignity and even find genuine joy in the midst of struggle. It is as if we are all asking, what do I want from life? When perhaps the more powerful question is, what does life want from me? We live in a society that has transformed happiness into a commodity, something that can be bought, achieved, measured, and even compared. Social networks bombard us with rehearsed smiles, paradisiacal trips, perfect relationships, and idealized bodies, as if everyone lived in an eternal margarine commercial. And in the midst of all this, what happens to those who are not happy? To those who feel a silent emptiness, even though they have everything the world says should bring fulfillment? This is precisely where Viktor Frankl comes in with an uncomfortable but liberating observation. The direct search for happiness can be the fastest path to frustration and existential emptiness. According to him, when happiness becomes the main goal in life, it loses its essence and becomes unattainable. Frankl observed this in his patients, people who had money, status, comfort, but still felt deeply unhappy, disoriented, without a why to justify their days. The problem is that happiness, by nature, is an ephemeral emotion. It depends on external stimuli, favorable circumstances, and a momentary feeling of pleasure or well-being. When it is placed at the center of existence, everything that escapes, this feeling begins to be seen as a failure, as a symptom of something wrong, and that is how emptiness is born. Frankl called this existential emptiness, an emotional state in which the person does not feel physical pain or evident suffering, but experiences a deep sense of uselessness, of lack of purpose. It is as if we are alive, but disconnected from the reason why. And no matter how much we try to fill this hole with more pleasure, more distractions, more consumption, it remains there. Silent, uncomfortable, often disguised as boredom or anxiety. The paradox is clear. The more we seek happiness as an end in itself, the more it eludes us. But when we place our focus on something greater, on a purpose, on a meaning, on a mission, happiness arises as a consequence, as a byproduct. Happiness, then, ceases to be an objective and becomes a natural manifestation of those who live with intention. Imagine being surrounded by death, hunger, disease, violence, and a complete lack of freedom. Imagine waking up every day in a concentration, a camp, knowing that you might not see the next dawn. For most people, this scenario would mean the end of hope, the total collapse of mind and spirit. But for Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and prisoner at Auschwitz, this environment of extreme pain was where he discovered one of the most profound truths about human existence: that it is possible to find meaning even in the most brutal suffering. Frankl realized day after day that the prisoners who managed to resist psychologically were not the physically strongest, nor the most privileged. They were the ones who found a reason to carry on. For some, it was the hope of seeing a loved one again. For others, it was the idea of fulfilling a mission, even if it was just maintaining one's own dignity in the face of horror. Frankl, for example, would visualize himself in the future, in a classroom, explaining everything he had experienced, transforming that pain into a lesson. This visualization kept him going, even when his body wanted to give up. He didn't deny suffering, he gave it meaning, and that for him was what made all the difference. While many succumbed to despair, apathy, and lack of meaning, Frankl sustained life based on the idea that human beings always have the freedom to choose their attitude towards circumstances. Even in an environment where everything had been taken away, name, clothes, dignity, there was still a choice, how to react to what could not be changed. And it is precisely at this point that his theory becomes stronger. Pain, inevitable at some point in life, can be unbearable if it is not reinterpreted. But when it is seen as part of a purposeful journey, it does not destroy, it shapes. Frankl did not romanticize suffering, but he did state that when we cannot avoid pain, we have the power to choose how we will face it. This is the key. It is not about accepting suffering as something desirable, but about transforming it into testimony, into resistance, into proof that the human spirit, when guided by a sense, is capable of overcoming even hell. If life were a blank book, what would you write to make it meaningful? This is the question that silently echoes behind Viktor Frankl's philosophy. After surviving the Nazi concentration camps, Frankl not only rebuilt his life, but also structured a new way of understanding human suffering, and most importantly, of finding purpose amidst chaos. This is where logotherapy was born, a therapeutic approach that starts from a simple but transformative premise. The main driver of human existence is the search for meaning. But where does this meaning come from? Frankl believed that there is no single formula. In fact, he identified 3 fundamental paths that anyone can follow to give meaning to their life. And each of them is a door that opens, even in the most difficult moments. The first path is that of creative fulfillment. Here, meaning is found through what we do, create, or leave as a contribution to the world. It can be a job, an art, a project, or even a gesture of compassion. This is the idea that life acquires value when we leave something of our own beyond ourselves. The second path is that of lived experience, especially in love. Frankl believed that truly connecting with another person, seeing the other in their totality, is one of the purest forms of meaning. When we love, we transcend the ego, break through isolation, and recognize that we are part of something greater, a web of affections, exchanges, and meanings that cannot be bought or replaced. Finally, there is the third path, perhaps the most profound and challenging: inevitable suffering. When pain knocks on the door and there is no escape, the attitude we choose toward it can reveal new meaning to us. It's not about seeking out suffering, but about facing it with dignity when it is inevitable. Frankl saw this as a form of inner freedom, the freedom to choose how we respond to what life throws at us. And the most powerful thing about all of this is that none of these paths depend on ideal conditions. You can be unemployed, alone, grieving, and still find meaning. Because meaning is not outside of you. It is in the way you position yourself in the face of reality. Frankl teaches, us that life never ceases to have meaning. Even when it seems to have lost its way, it is up to us to seek it, discover it, and above all, live it. There is a silent, almost imperceptible inversion that has distorted the way we see life. The idea that happiness is the ultimate goal and that everything we do should serve to make us happier. We work, we interact, we study, we take care of ourselves, all with the expectation of achieving this idealized state of constant well-being. But Viktor Frankl, with the clarity of someone who has faced the worst of human existence, proposed a radical counterpoint. Happiness should not be pursued directly. For him, happiness is not a destination, but rather a side effect, a natural byproduct that arises when we are engaged in something that we consider truly meaningful. This view seems to contradict everything that contemporary culture preaches, but at the same time, it explains much of the emptiness that so many people feel, even when they apparently have it all. Frankl realized, while still in the concentration camps, that those who resisted emotionally were not motivated by small pleasures or happy moments, because these were scarce or non-existent. They stayed alive because they had a why strong, enough to support any how, and that why didn't have to be grand or heroic. Sometimes it was the memory of a child, the desire to start over, the faith that all of that would one day make sense. When life is guided by this kind of purpose, happiness appears as a natural consequence, not as an artificial goal. That's where the logic reverses. In today's society, people seek pleasure as an anesthetic for boredom and pain. They accumulate experiences in the hope of filling a void, but that void persists because meaning is not born from consumption, but from contribution. Happiness that is born from meaning is more solid, more lasting, more silent. It doesn't shout, it doesn't need validation. It just exists like a light that accompanies those who walk in the right direction. Frankl then invites us to abandon the blind search for pleasure and start looking at what really matters. What are we building? Why do we get up every day? What are we leaving in the world? When these questions are answered honestly, happiness stops being an obsession and becomes a companion, quiet, discreet, and deeply true. We live in an age of comfort. Never in the history of humanity have we had so much access to technology, information, food, entertainment, and security. Many people's routines today are marked by air-conditioned environments, soft beds, apps that deliver everything to their door, and screens that distract the mind 24 hours a day. And yet, we have never been so lost. Viktor Frankl clearly saw this modern paradox. When life becomes too comfortable but devoid of meaning, a type of silent suffering arises, existential emptiness. Unlike physical pain or obvious trauma, this emptiness does not scream. It whispers. It manifests itself as constant boredom, lack of motivation, identity crises, and a strange feeling that something is missing, even when, technically, nothing is missing. And this is one of the most dangerous traps of modern life, having all basic needs met, but no authentic reason to exist. Frankl believed that human beings are not driven only by instincts or material needs, but by a spiritual force, the desire to find meaning in life. And when this desire is ignored, even the most luxurious lifestyle can become unbearable. The problem is that comfort alone cannot fill the emptiness of the soul. On the contrary, it can numb the conscience and distance us from the necessary confrontation with deep questions. Why am I here? What is the purpose of my existence? Where am I going? Frankl saw in his patients and later in social behaviors a constant attempt to replace meaning with pleasure. As if filling time with stimulation were the same as filling the soul with purpose. But there is a huge difference between being entertained and being truly alive. The absence of suffering does not mean the presence of meaning. The absence of pain is not synonymous with fulfillment. And that is why, in many cases, modern human beings suffer not because they have little, but because they do not know what to do with everything they have. A comfortable life without meaning becomes a burden too light to be carried with dignity. Frankl warns us, without a purpose, even comfort becomes oppressive. Because we are not born just to avoid pain, we are born to contribute, to transform, to leave a mark. And when we forget this, we fall into the trap of surviving numb but never truly living. There is a freedom that no one can take away from us. It doesn't matter if we are in a dark room, in a hospital bed, in a moment of loss, or even imprisoned by forces that seem greater than any possibility of choice. Viktor Frankl discovered this in the most brutal way possible, confined in concentration camps, watching his family being destroyed, his dignity being stripped away, and his life being reduced to the most basic of survival. But even there, in the depths of hell, he identified a universal and non-negotiable truth. The last of human freedoms is the freedom to choose one's attitude towards circumstances. In other words, when everything is taken away from us, we still have the power to decide how we will react. This completely changes the way we see life. In a world that conditions us to believe that we are victims of our environment, of the pains of the past, or of the pressures of the present, Frankl offers us a liberating responsibility. We are masters of our inner posture. Even when we don't choose what happens to us, we can choose how we will deal with it. This is the basis of logotherapy, the idea that we are not products of our circumstances, but rather beings capable of giving them meaning. Frankl saw this ability as the turning point for mental and spiritual health. Those who can find a why and choose an attitude aligned with that purpose become resilient even in the most inhumane scenarios. He did not deny suffering, but taught that it can be faced with dignity, and it is not about toxic positivity, pretending that everything is fine, or romanticizing pain. It is about recognizing that there is a spark of freedom within each of us, and that this spark can be the difference between succumbing and overcoming. This inner freedom also challenges us to step out of the role of victims and take the lead in our own story. It means stopping waiting for the world to change, for conditions to improve, or for happiness to fall from the sky. It means understanding that the way we choose to live, even in the face of the inevitable, is what determines the depth and authenticity of our existence. Frankl saw this as the essence of the human condition. We are the only beings capable of looking at chaos and still saying, I choose to make sense of this. And when that choice is made, even the most absurd pain can be transformed into testimony, learning, and even inspiration. If you like this video and want to continue reflecting on life-changing topics, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any news. Your subscription is essential so that we can grow together and bring you more and more quality content. Thank you very much for watching this far. Your presence makes all the difference. See you in the next video.